The Third Reich ran on abbreviations. Behind every letter, a machine of war. These were the organizations that shaped millions of lives and ended millions more. Decoded, a World War II Wednesday series on Hardinghaus books.
You know, history is packed with abbreviations that we all recognize but maybe don't fully understand. SS, HJ, NSDAP. These are more than just letters. They're codes that shaped millions of lives and ended millions more. In this series, we decode them. One abbreviation, every episode. We give you the full story behind the letters. So let's jump right in with something you might not expect. This is from a German government report way back in 1923 when they were keeping an eye on the early Nazi movement. And what it points to is a pretty surprising truth. For a long, long time, the party that would one day command the wealth of a nation was constantly, desperately broke. It reveals something fundamental we often forget. Before the NSDAP was a machine of conquest, it was just a fringe movement, always just one step away from collapsing into total irrelevance. All right, so to really get how this struggling group eventually grabbed an entire country by the throat, we've got to start with the absolute basics. We need to decode the name itself, those four infamous letters that came to define them. NSDAP, right? You've seen those four letters a million times in books and documentaries, but what do they actually stand for? Okay, the full German name is Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei. In English, that's the Nationalsozialistische German Workers Party. Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? And that's pretty much why the abbreviation NSDAP became so common, not just for the rest of the world, but inside Germany too. It was their own official shorthand. So now we know what the letters mean, but that leads to the real question, doesn't it? How on earth did this party travel the path from being an obscure little group arguing in a Munich beer hall to holding absolute totalitarian power over all of Germany? Let's trace that incredible journey. The story really kicks off in 1919 with something called the German Workers Party, the DAP. A young Adolf Hitler, who was actually sent by the army to spy on them, ends up loving what he hears and joins. A year later, it gets a new name, the NSDAP. Then, in 1923, they try to seize power with a violent coup, the Beer Hall Putsch, and it fails just spectacularly. And honestly, that should have been the end of it. The party was banned, Hitler was in jail, but he managed to turn his trial into a massive propaganda stunt, and when he got out in 1925, he refounded the party, this time with himself in absolute, unquestioned control. That single move set the stage for the final leap. Just 8 years later, in 1933, he was named chancellor, and the party essentially became the state. Now, that leap from a failed coup to total control, well, that was no accident. It was made possible by the party's internal design, its very architecture, which was built from day one for absolute control. To really understand the NSDAP, you have to look under the hood. At the absolute heart of how the party was built was this one single idea, the Führer principle, or the leader principle. And it's simple, really. It just means that all authority, all power, flows from the top down. Period. At every single level, from Hitler himself all the way down to the smallest local office, there were no votes, no committees, no arguing about what to do. There were leaders and there were followers. And orders were meant to be obeyed, no questions asked. And they took this top-down idea and literally slapped it right onto the map of Germany. The party just completely ignored the country's traditional states and provinces. Instead, they carved Germany up into their own districts, which they called Gaue. You can think of each Gau as a little party kingdom, ruled by a powerful official, the Gauleiter, who answered only to Hitler. It was a shadow government, laid right over the real one. And this is where you can really see how that chain of command worked. It was a perfect pyramid. You have Hitler at the top, below him, 18 national leaders called Reichsleiter, then the regional Gauleiter, then Kreisleiter for the counties, Ortsgruppenleiter for towns, all the way down to the tiny local level. The Blockleiter, or Blockwarden, who was responsible for keeping an eye on just 40 to 60 households. This wasn't just politics, it was a system of surveillance and control designed to reach into every single apartment building on every street in Germany. So you have this massive, sprawling structure, right? Reaching down to every street corner. But it wasn't just built to win elections. Oh no. Once they got into power, its real purpose kicked in. It became a machine for achieving total control. The way the party did this was by creating this huge web of organizations that touched every part of life. The goal? to organize and indoctrinate every single person. So you had the Hitler Youth for boys, the League of German Girls for, well, girls. The German Labor Front took the place of all the old trade unions. There were groups for women, for welfare, even for how you spent your vacation with the Strength Through Joy program. The idea was that a German citizen should be able to live their entire life, from cradle to grave, completely inside a party-controlled bubble. And take a look at this. This shows you one of their most powerful tools for making that control feel, well, visible: the uniform. See, uniforms weren't just for soldiers anymore. Party bosses, youth leaders, labor officials, pretty much everyone had one. It created this overwhelming public presence, a constant visual signal on every street in every town of exactly who was in charge. By the time the war ended in 1945, the NSDAP had 8.5 million members. I mean, that is an enormous number. It makes it sound like practically the entire nation signed up. But, and this is so important to understand, that huge number is actually kind of misleading, because 8.5 million members was only about 11% of the German population at the time. This is a critical point. The Third Reich wasn't run by a majority. It was controlled by a dedicated and powerful minority that imposed its will on everyone else, using a mix of real enthusiasm, career opportunism, and the quiet, fearful compliance of the masses. All right, let's dig into a few more numbers, because they tell a really surprising story about the party's long, slow climb from the absolute fringes of politics. So what this all tells us is pretty stunning, really. For its first decade, the NSDAP was basically a nobody. Hitler's early party number, 555, was just a trick. They started counting at 501 to make their tiny little group seem bigger than it was. As late as 1928, get this, they won only 12 seats in the national parliament. A police report from their own hometown of Munich even said that public interest in them was waning. The massive, explosive growth, that only happened after Hitler took power in January 1933. Then, suddenly, membership tripled in just 3 months, as everyone rushed to join what was very clearly the winning team. So all of this, it leaves us with one huge, chilling question. How does a fringe political movement, one that was dismissed by the authorities and constantly on the verge of going bankrupt, managed to become one of the most destructive forces in all of human history? It's a question that really stands as a powerful warning. Next time on Decoded, we're going to tackle an abbreviation that, maybe more than any other, became a global symbol of pure terror and fanaticism. We'll explore the organization that started as Hitler's personal bodyguard and grew into a monstrous parallel state of its own, the SS.
Alte Fotos, Staub und Zeit. Voices lost in history's light. Ein Gesicht so jung und stumm. The world was burning all around. The last witnesses, stories true. World War II, from a German point of view. Geister des Krieges